Mother-in-law's voice cut through the entire restaurant like a knife. "You work at a clinic?" She said it the way someone else might say you collect garbage. "Ryan is bringing home a clinic receptionist?" Every head at the table turned to look at me. I remember the exact feeling. That specific kind of humiliation where your face goes hot but your hands go cold, and you don't know whether to laugh or disappear. I did neither. I just sat there with my water glass halfway to my lips, frozen, while Ryan's hand found mine under the table and squeezed. He leaned close to my ear and whispered, so quietly only I could hear, "Should I just tell them?" I shook my head. Not yet. I had no idea that decision would change everything about how that dinner ended. My name is Nora. I'm 31 years old, and I spent most of my adult life being exactly the kind of woman that Ryan's family didn't see coming. I grew up in Akron, Ohio. My dad drove a school bus for 22 years. My mom worked the overnight shift at a fulfillment center until her knees gave out. We weren't poor in the way people romanticize. We weren't struggling beautifully. We were just careful. Coupons the counter, hand-me-down winter coats, the kind of household where you turned off lights when you left a room because it genuinely mattered. I was the first person in my family to finish a 4-year degree. When I graduated from Ohio State with a degree in health administration, my dad cried in the parking lot of the Panera where we went to celebrate. He kept saying, "I don't even know what health administration is, but I'm so damn proud of you." That's still one of my favorite memories. I got a job as an administrative coordinator at a cardiology clinic in Columbus. Not glamorous. A lot of scheduling, insurance verification, patient intake. But I was good at it, and I liked it, and it paid enough for a 1-bedroom apartment that was mine. That felt like everything. I met Ryan 2 years ago at a friend's birthday thing. One of those low-key backyard gatherings where half the people don't know each other and you end up talking to someone for 3 hours because there's nowhere else to be. Ryan was standing near the cooler, looking slightly lost, wearing a flannel shirt and holding a can of beer he hadn't opened yet. He had this way of listening, completely still, actually paying attention, that I noticed before I noticed anything else about him. We talked until the party was basically over. He told me he was in finance-adjacent work, which I didn't push on because, honestly, neither of us seemed very interested in talking about work. We talked about the drive from Akron to Columbus when you catch the sunrise just right over the fields, about whether the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is legitimately great or just Cleveland trying, about the particular loneliness of big cities when you're from somewhere small. He asked for my number. I gave it to him. On our first actual date, he took me to a Thai place in German Village that had maybe 8 tables and cash only. We split a bottle of wine and closed the place down. He drove a 4-year-old Honda Civic with a crack in the passenger side mirror that he'd taped over with electrical tape. When I commented on it, he laughed and said, "It works fine. I keep meaning to fix it, but then I just don't." I liked him immediately. Not the butterflies kind of like, something steadier. The kind that feels less like excitement and more like recognition. We dated for 8 months before he told me he loved me. Not in a grand way. We were doing dishes after I made pasta at his apartment, and he just said it, facing the sink, like it was a fact he'd been sitting with for a while, and finally decided to say out loud. I turned off the faucet and set it back. Then we finished the dishes. 1.5 years in, he proposed. We were at Hocking Hill State Park, hiking a trail we'd done twice before, and he stopped at this overlook we always stopped at anyway, and he pulled the ring out of his jacket pocket and said, "I've been carrying this for 6 weeks waiting for the right moment, and I think every moment with you is the right moment. So," I said yes before he finished the sentence. We told our families. My parents were thrilled. My dad shook Ryan's hand for approximately 45 seconds straight. Ryan's family was another story. I should explain something about Ryan's family. His mother, Judith, grew up in a wealthy suburb of Cincinnati. Her father built a regional logistics company from scratch in the 70s, and by the time she married Ryan's father, a corporate attorney, both families had more money than anyone needed. Ryan's parents lived in a 6,000 square foot house in Indian Hill. His sister had gone to Vanderbilt. His younger brother was finishing his MBA at Wharton. Ryan had attended private school, then went to Princeton, and had worked, as I would eventually understand, in a way that was very deliberate and very much his own choice. But I didn't know any of that yet. Not fully. He'd mentioned his family was comfortable, that his parents were a lot, and that he'd made some choices they didn't entirely understand. I didn't press. I figured families were complicated and I'd learn as I went. The engagement dinner was my first real introduction to them. We drove to Cincinnati on a Saturday in early March. Ryan was quiet most of the drive. Not cold, just somewhere in his head. I'd made an effort with my outfit. A navy wrap dress, my good earrings, low heels. I looked professional, put together. I thought that would matter. The house was enormous. I'd prepared myself, but still, pulling into that driveway, seeing the manicured lawn and the stone facade in the 4-car garage, I felt something shift in my stomach. Not quite nerves, more like recalibration. Judith met us at the door. She was in her early 60s, thin, immaculate in a cream silk blouse and pressed slacks. She had the kind of composure that comes from decades of never having to hurry. She kissed Ryan on the cheek, and then turned to me with a smile that was technically a smile. "Nora," she said, "we've heard so little about you." I would later understand that was not an accident. Ryan's father, Gerald, was warmer, or at least more neutral. He shook my hand and offered me a drink and asked polite questions about Columbus. Ryan's sister Ashley was there with her husband, and she was cordial in the way that people are cordial when they've already formed an opinion but haven't decided to share it yet. Ryan's brother was joining by video call from Philadelphia, which saved me from one more set of eyes. We sat down to dinner. The table was the kind where there's too much space between people and the food is served by someone who isn't family. I had not grown up eating dinner with staff present. I didn't know where to look when the woman refilled my water glass. Everything was fine, in the way that things can be fine on the surface while being quietly terrible underneath, until Judith asked what I did for work. "I'm an administrative coordinator at a cardiology clinic," I said. "Patient intake, scheduling, insurance processing. It keeps things running." Judith tilted her head. "A clinic receptionist?" "Administrative coordinator," I said again calmly. "It's a bit more than reception, but, of course," she said, and looked at Ryan. "Ryan is bringing home a clinic receptionist." She didn't say it to hurt me. That was the thing. She said it the way you'd state a weather fact. "It's going to rain tomorrow." Pure information. The damage was just a side effect. The table went quiet. Ryan's hand found mine under the tablecloth and he leaned to my ear. "Should I just tell them?" I shook my head. I didn't know exactly what he meant to tell them, but I knew I didn't want the moment to become about that. I didn't want to be rescued. "Not like that. Not there." Ashley cleared her throat. Her husband refilled his wine glass with great focus. Judith moved on to asking Ryan about someone named Charles from his old firm. And the conversation slid forward like nothing had happened. Because for her, nothing had. But I sat there for the rest of dinner feeling like a guest who'd accidentally walked into the wrong party and was too polite to leave. On the drive home, I stared out the window at the dark Ohio highway and didn't say anything for a long time. Ryan said, "I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize for her." "I know, I'm still sorry." I turned to look at him. "Ryan, what did you want to tell them?" He was quiet for a moment. "Just context, about my work. About some things they don't know." "What things?" Another pause. "Things I should have told you more clearly a long time ago. I was worried it would change how you saw me." I looked at him for a long moment. "How would it change how I see you?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "That's the thing. I don't think it would, but I've spent a long time not knowing that for sure." I let it go for that night. But I didn't forget it. 3 weeks later, we were having dinner at my apartment. I'd made chicken piccata, which I was finally consistently good at, when he sat down across from me and said, "I want to tell you something. All of it." And he did. Ryan had gone to Princeton, studied economics, graduated, and gone into investment banking in New York at 22 the way that people like him were expected to. He'd been good at it. Very good at it. Very good at it. By 27, he'd made more money than he'd known what to do with. He'd also been miserable in a way he couldn't name until a close friend had a heart attack at 30 and survived, and Ryan had sat in that hospital waiting room and thought, I don't want to be doing this in 3 years. He left the firm. His family thought he'd lost his mind. He took 18 months, traveled, figured out what he actually cared about. Then he came back to Ohio, deliberately, pointedly, to a place he loved for reasons that had nothing to do with prestige, and started a small investment fund focused on regional businesses. Not flashy, mostly operating in the background. He kept his life small on purpose. The Civic, the flannel shirt, the apartment that was nice but not ostentatious. He wasn't broke. He was, by most measures, quite wealthy. He'd simply decided to stop performing wealth. I sat with that for a long time. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I finally asked. Because, he said, every woman I dated before you, the moment they knew, everything changed. The way they looked at me, the way they made decisions. I didn't want that. He looked at me steadily. With you, I wanted to know if you loved me, not the account. I would have, I said. I know, he said. I know that now. I thought about being angry, about the months of not knowing, about his mother's voice at that dinner table, a clinic receptionist, and the fact that he'd let it happen when he could have stopped it. Part of me was frustrated. A bigger part of me understood something I hadn't been able to name yet. He hadn't been protecting himself from me. He'd been protecting something fragile and real from being contaminated by something he'd spent years running from. We talked until 2 a.m. When I went to bed, I lay there staring at the ceiling and thought, I'm going to marry this man. And then I thought, I already knew that. We got married in September. Small ceremony. 40 people, a converted barn venue outside Columbus that we'd found through a friend, string lights and wildflowers, and a playlist we'd built together over 3 months. My dad walked me down the aisle. Ryan's father was there, pleasant and polished. Ashley and her husband flew in. Judith came. She sat in the second row in a pale green dress and watched the whole ceremony with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not hostile, not warm. Somewhere between the two, like she was gathering information. The reception was relaxed. Good food, open bar, a dance floor that actually got used. Ryan and I danced to a song we'd argued pleasantly about for 2 months before agreeing on. My dad danced with my mom until she told him his timing was off, which it was. But she didn't mean it unkindly. Late in the evening, I was getting a glass of water at the bar when Judith appeared beside me. You've made Ryan very happy, she said. She said it like she was reporting findings. He makes me happy too, I said. She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the dance floor, where Ryan was laughing at something my dad had said. He left a great deal behind to build this life, she said. I hope you understand what that means. I think I do, I said. He told me. She turned to look at me. Something moved across her face. Surprise, recalibration. He told you about, yes, I said. All of it. Another pause. And it didn't change anything? It confirmed some things, I said. But no, it didn't change anything. She looked at me for a long moment. I didn't look away. I wasn't trying to be cold. I was just done being the one who looked away first. He chose well, she said finally. And then she walked back toward the table. I stood there for a second and then I laughed, quietly to myself. Because he chose well from Judith was probably as close to a blessing as I was ever going to get. And honestly, it was enough. That was 8 months ago. Ryan's fund had a strong year. We bought a house in Bexley, a 1940s colonial that needs work, which we are doing slowly and largely ourselves, which Judith finds baffling and Gerald secretly finds impressive. Ryan retiled the downstairs bathroom last month. I painted the kitchen a shade of green that took me 4 sample swatches to commit to. We have a dog now, a 3-year-old mutt named Buckeye that Ryan pretends to be indifferent about and who sleeps on Ryan's side of the bed. Ashley reached out to me in January. I was surprised. She said she'd been thinking about the engagement dinner and that she'd let her mother set the tone when she should have done better. It wasn't a big speech. Just a text, actually. But it meant something, and I said so. Judith and I will probably never be close. I've made my peace with that. She's not cruel. She's just someone for whom the world has very clear categories, and I will always be, in some part of her mind, the clinic receptionist who didn't fit the picture she'd had in her head. I can't change that. I'm not interested in trying. What I know is this. Ryan looked at me when I had no idea who he was, beyond a flannel shirt and a cracked car mirror and a way of listening that felt like being seen. He chose me in the ordinary present tense of a Tuesday evening doing dishes. That's the version of love I'd always wanted without having a name for it. And now I have it. My dad asked me a few months ago if I ever felt like Ryan's world was just too different from where I came from. If I ever felt out of place. I thought about it honestly. Sometimes, I said, but Ryan's never made me feel that way. Just the edges of his world, not him. My dad nodded. That's all that matters then, he said. He's right. That's all that matters. I don't need the people at that dinner table to understand what we have. I don't need Judith to revise her categories. I don't need the world to see it and approve. I have a house with a green kitchen and a dog that won't sleep on his own bed. I have a husband who cried a little at our wedding when my dad shook his hand and said, "Take care of my girl," and who has every single day since. That's the whole story. That's the one worth telling. I've thought a lot about that dinner table. The way Judith said clinic receptionist, like she was identifying a stain. The way the room went quiet. The way I sat there and held my own face steady while everything in me wanted to fold. Here's what I know now, that I didn't fully know then. How you respond in the moments where you're being underestimated tells you more about yourself than any success ever will. I didn't argue. I didn't perform. I didn't need Ryan to rescue me by announcing his bank account to people who'd already decided what I was worth. I just sat there, held my ground quietly, and chose to let the truth come out on its own time. That took something. I'm not sure I'd recognized it as strength in the moment, but looking back, it was. There's a version of that night where I react, where I say something sharp, where I make it a scene, where I demand to be seen. And maybe part of me wanted to. But I've learned that the most powerful thing you can do when someone dismisses you is simply to continue being exactly who you are, without apology, without explanation, without asking for their approval. The truth doesn't need to be announced, it just needs time. Ryan spent years quietly dismantling a life that looked impressive from the outside because he understood something most people take decades to learn, that how your life looks and how your life feels are two completely different things, and only one of them actually matters. He drove a cracked Honda and wore flannel shirts not because he couldn't afford better, but because he'd already been on the other side and found it hollow. That's not naivety. That's hard-won clarity. That's what real intelligence looks like. Not the kind that gets you status, but the kind that helps you figure out what you actually want and then have the guts to build it. And Judith, I don't hold it against her. I genuinely don't. She built her understanding of the world from a very specific set of experiences, and I don't fit those categories, and that's uncomfortable for her. People who've only ever measured worth one way don't just stop one day because you ask them to. What I can control is whether I let her framework become mine. I decided a long time ago that it wouldn't. My dad used to say that the only opinion of you that should keep you up at night is your own. He wasn't being dismissive of other people. He just understood that most of the time, the people who judge you harshest are working from the least information. Judith knew my job title and my zip code. She didn't know what I'd worked for, what I'd built on my own, what I'd chosen to be proud of. She'd made a complete picture from 2 data points. That's not judgment, that's a rough sketch. What I want anyone watching this to take away, really take away, not just nod it, is this: You don't have to prove yourself to people who've already made up their minds. You just have to keep going, keep doing the work, keep building the life that makes sense to you with the people who actually see you. The rest tends to sort itself out. Not always neatly, not always quickly, but it does. Ryan and I are okay. We have a green kitchen and a dog named Buckeye and a bathroom that Ryan retiled himself on a random Saturday in October. It's not the life Judith pictured for her son. It's better than that. It's real.